Thanks for joining us today and watching a conversation that we're going to have with Ekow Nimako, a Canadian artist who's joining us today to have a conversation with us about being a Black builder in a fairly privileged and white Lego building community. So let's go ahead and get started. Ekow, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. My name is Ekow Nimako. I'm Ghanaian Canadian, which means my parents were born in Ghana and immigrated to Canada. And I was born in Montreal and grew up in Toronto. And I've been using Lego since as far as I can remember, probably about 3 or 4 years old. And I've managed as like a multidisciplinary artist, I managed to take my love of building and merge that with my arts education and love of art and craft myself a career as a sculptor or Lego artist. And my work often deals with the subject matter of my work is Black children, often mythical Black children and creatures, and putting them together to really create these tender moments between these children and nature, but also to create a kind of safety for uh, these vulnerable children and vulnerable creatures to coexist.
One of my favorite pieces of yours is Flower Girl. Can you tell us a little
Me
bit?
too.
I'm glad. It's just so amazingly beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about the story behind that?
Yeah. So Flower Girl actually started out um, addressing more ceremonial flower girls. My first show, Building Black, in 2014, um, was I was really interested in just creating Black culture using Lego because it's something I'd never seen, growing up. And, I was inspired to do this because I knew it was possible. Prior to that, I didn't know people could have like a career building small and large scale sculptures out of Lego. But then when I saw that Nathan Sueyo was doing it as a career, Sean Kenny and other people, certified professionals around the world, I said, oh, this is a thing that can be done. So now go ahead and do it. Um, and I have to say, it was definitely through my interactions and relationships with queer Black women um, that really pushed me to explore Black culture with my work. And I think that goes hand in hand with a lot of Black artists because representation is just not something you see. Like when I was growing up, I was watching Thundercats, I was watching G.I. Joe, Transformers, just like so many other kids. But unlike so many kids that were responding to the shows, like I had Panthro. I knew Panthro was Black, I had Jazz, Jazz in the Transformers was Black. Um, but, in G.I. Joe, you had Roadblock. And I bring these things up just because these are the things that really kind of fueled my imagination when I was really young. And at the same time, I just didn't see myself in these worlds, right? Like Star Wars was huge to me. It still is huge to me. But at the same time, you have Mace Windu, Lando, Finn, right? It's changing a bit more now, and you're seeing a lot more, yeah, diversity, even as far as gender diversity as well. But at the same time, it's just not what I saw, and it's still set in a mainly white universe, right? So it leads you to believe that in a galaxy as vast as one that was created, Black people are still an extreme minority. Like we don't exist in space.
Right.
So these kind of things all definitely help fuel. But I've been tangential. We were talking about Flower Girl, and the sculpture, yeah, was she was created to address the fact. Like I just really started thinking about ceremonial flower girls and how their innocence is often just like on display, and everyone is cherishing how innocent and beautiful these girls are as part of this like wedding processional. And I just started thinking about enslavement and in North America, and that when you know when the enslaved were allowed or permitted to marry, it, they didn't have the same kind of or weren't afforded the same kind of uh, ceremony, and uh, even like the clothing around it was not afforded to like these young black girls at that time. So I just started thinking about them, and I wanted to bring them into the collective consciousness. So I created a sculpture of a young flower girl that was black, and that's a lot of times you can dig deeper into the meaning and relevance of these kind of artworks, whether it's made of Lego or not. But for me, so many times it's just the existence of the sculpture alone gives it its significance, you know, without going into too much of the intellectualizing of like artworks. Just having a black flower girl made of Lego, period, was important beyond like the deeper connotations as to why it was made. So yeah. And that sculpture evolved over time. It began in 2013, and since the sculpture didn't get purchased during that time, it would get shown in exhibitions and come back to the studio. And that's the beauty of Lego. I got to keep like as I got better and more proficient at building, I would change the sculpture as my skills evolved. So then did the sculpture. And Flower Girl currently is in the UK as part of the touring exhibition Brick by Brick, which is making some rounds in smaller communities in the United Kingdom, along with, I think, 15 other international artists that use Lego in their practice.
which is really, really cool to see. Um, you talked about growing up and seeing yourself represented or not represented in the media and the toys that you played with.
Right.
Thinking about that from a Lego specific perspective, how did you see yourself represented growing up playing with Lego?
Oh, I didn't. Like, like not at all. Not in commercials for Lego products. I mean, and if anyone out there, you want to do the research, you feel free. You might find like that one Afro black kid in a Lego commercial somewhere. But if you add them all up, I didn't see that. I didn't see that commercial. But I know I saw all the other commercials that didn't have kids that look like me in it. All right. And the minifigures, I mean, that's a whole other thing too, because I don't think they really started adding flesh tones until when was sometime in the 90s, maybe? I don't know. I actually don't know. Was it before that?
I do.
Yeah, it was.
2003 with the Cloud City set where all of, Luke and Leia were all yellow and Lando was brown. Um,
Okay.
and that quickly evolved into light flesh, as it's called in the Lego palette, and dark flesh colored minifigs later that same year.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, just from a historical standpoint, 2003 was when the
2003. So
start.
before that, it was all yellow. So and I was an 80s kid. So growing up in 80s, you had the yellow minifigures. But, The Simpsons taught us a valuable lesson about yellow, which is that it's code for white. And, again, I don't expect like the vast non-black people to necessarily grasp that in the beginning, but for black people and like racialized people, I'm sure you know that, right? Like, because The Simpsons comes out, they're yellow, but just by whether it's like cultural cues, the voice actors, or just the way that they draw people, you can change the pigment, but you know what color. Like Bart's homie Lewis, is that his name? And the Dr. Hibbert and stuff like. And that's what's interesting is that yellow can code for white, but we don't say that that's what it is, But what you just referenced, that Cloud City, that whole set, that's the marker right there. Because everybody's yellow until you got to make a black person, right? And then it's like, no, he's black. It's like, okay, I appreciate that, but then that means that yellow isn't yellow, yellow's white, and that's not necessarily talked about, So you have these yellow, everyone playing with yellow minifigures. That's cool, but the hair pieces that got added to the yellow minifigure, they weren't black hair. So you can look at that and say, oh, okay, I know what I'm looking at, and you don't have to think about it. You just know. You know, just like when you watch the Lego movie and you have Chris Pratt voicing the guy, he's yellow, but you don't have to think, oh, he's a white guy, but we all know he's a white guy, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the part where representation failed, right? Where we get left out of that's um, it's not inclusive, you know.
You used a very important word, inclusion there. And so let's shift the conversation a little bit to talking about the Lego hobbyist art community itself. Uh, First of all, how or not are you involved in the Lego hobbyist community, whether conventions or local clubs or the online community? Tell me a little bit about your involvement with the hobbyist community.
Right, certainly. I wouldn't consider myself a hobbyist. I think that without a doubt, if you love Lego, you love Lego. You know, what you do with it is what you do with it. But that is the unifying aspect. I think is that you love Lego, right? It's like I love Lego, cool. Now, what do you do with it? I refer to myself as like AFOL. I don't personally, but I am, because I'm
Yeah.
an adult fan of Lego. But I don't, yeah, I don't consider myself that because I've always been an artist first. If there was no Lego, I'd be making sculptures out of something else.
Mhm.
I'd be finding a way to express myself through whatever medium works. It turns out that Lego was just the best material for me to work with because I was most familiar with it. When I was in art school, I used metal, I used wood, I tried different things, plastics, I tried stuff. But then when I realized that I could actually use Lego to express my artistic ideas, it was a no-brainer. And I was like, of course I'm going to use it. I love doing this. This is the best thing ever. I was part of the Toro Lug Toronto group
Mhm.
for a bit. I don't know. I'm not fully in contact with anyone too much from the group. Maybe one or two people here and there on social media. So I don't know if they consider me completely cast out or if I'm just like a transient member that comes in whenever, I don't know. But I assume I'm not considered part of the group anymore. And I haven't been to any of the conventions or stuff. And I mean, I still I follow a lot of um, Lego creations online, and I get a lot of inspiration by a lot of the cool things that I see and like building techniques and stuff like that. And I think there's just a wealth of like information and inspiration to be found amongst like the hobbyist community. But because and I won't just come out and say I'm not a part of these communities because they're all filled like it's racism everywhere. Like that's not how I look at it. But at the same time, there's a very kind of particular aesthetic that goes with the hobbyist kind of communities, and I don't necessarily think that what I do falls into that aesthetic. I think that because I use Lego, it's like people will definitely respond to it. Those that love Lego will just be like, "This guy's making stuff out of Lego. Look at this stuff." Does it necessarily fit in with the hobbyist like world and culture and the cultural aesthetic? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I remember I did a Lego competition once. I didn't like it at all. Um, there's something in Toronto some time ago where you get to you do this competition and whoever wins gets like a job at the Lego Discovery Center
Yeah.
in Vaughan in the part of the Greater Toronto area. It was opening up, and I guess this was their way to kind of also um, get attention. So I did this competition. I didn't like it at all. Um, that's where I met the Toro Lug people. Like, so it was cool. I think that there's actually a part that I miss out on because I'm not part of those communities. Like when I went to this competition and I met a bunch of the other Lego geeks in the world, they told me about Bricklink, and I was just like, what? And they're like, Bricklink, and I was like, no. They're like, oh my god, this guy doesn't know. And then it turned into a whole thing. It's like you don't know. Like I didn't know about so many things. So it's great to have that kind of community connection. But at the same time, what I brought to that competition, I don't think they really recognized that. And just seeing the kind of ones that, I mean, I got past the first phase and then I got eliminated eventually. And just seeing the ones that kind of went through and managed to even like the people that won and whatever, I was just, I was kind of like shocked. I'm like, this is the work that I was like, okay, so then what I do doesn't work with what you guys like,
Hmm.
what you do, judges, whoever. If this is like what the result of what you think, someone that shows what it takes to be like a master builder and work within the Lego paradigm and all of that stuff. If that's like the kind of aesthetic and things you're going for, I don't belong. I'm not a part of this. I'll always like support Lego things, and I like to see Lego things. Um, I love mecha and stuff like that, or mech. I'm not sure. I never know which one they call it. Robots and futurism and things like that, architecture. So much stuff I love about it, but at the same time, because I'm an artist and because my work goes into a realm that is often like intellectualized and it goes deeper than the iconic value of Lego.
Hmm.
So that's where I find that it's like there's a deviation for me in what I do from like the hobbyist communities. Yeah.
You talked about aesthetic, and one of the, a couple of the themes that permeate your work are Afrocentrism, as you've called it, and Afrofuturism, which I think is just such a cool idea. Um, Tell us a little bit more about the recent work that you've done, in particular, that's I think displayed at the Aga Khan Museum. Is that
It
correct?
was, yeah. That show closed in February, but
Mm.
it was displayed there, yeah, from September to February. Right. Yeah, and that's the post that Lego put up a few weeks back of the Metropolis Kumbi Saleh 3020 CE. So okay, that exhibit was called Building Black Civilizations. So just to give a little context, so my series, whenever I'm making like artworks composed of black parts, it usually will fit into a series. The series head title is Building Black, and then there's like the subtitle of Building Black Civilizations, which focuses and draws its inspiration from Black and Afro diasporic and African civilizations, past and future, and uses architecture as well as um, different organic forms to just really kind of create like civilizations and bring them to light. Um, so that show was really, really well received, and I think it's important to show that Lego can be used as an artistic material. And it was always something I was very interested in down the line is like bringing that to the art world and you even teaching it if I have to encourage people to explore the material as that as a sculptural material and not just as like a hobbyist like iconic toy that you play with and geek out with, but more as a vehicle for for change and for doing the things that art does transcend. So
Hmm.
yeah, and bringing it back to the Afrofuturism, like the biggest example of Afrofuturism I think that has hit the world would be Black Panther and Wakanda, and that did so much for not just me but for Black communities around the world because of the same reasons I was talking about, where you might see a sci-fi show, it has Black people in it, you know, and I think that's often when it comes to Afrofuturism, it's about creating a world where Black people inhabit the entire world. It's from a Black view. And I think that's one of the major distinctions between non-Black people and Black people. And when I say non-Black, I do mean non-Black, but usually it's referring to like white people at large because that's what we see, right? When you think about pop culture and like movies and comic books and everything else, there's tons of it all over the place. Manga's huge, of course, but at the same time, the things that I know I had access to were basically white universes, white imagination.
Yeah.
And within that imagination, it's speckled with black characters, but it's not a black world. And when you're used to seeing yourself centralized in a world, it doesn't, I imagine it doesn't necessarily occur because of like systemic racism and how it works, that it's missing something. Like I see that. Like when I see like new sci-fi movie coming out, cool, check it out. there's something missing in a way, right? If it's just like, okay, there's a black crew member, she flies the ship, there's the black engineer guy, cool. But when you have like the rest of the team, like the aliens they go visit might be yellow, but we've talked about that, like so you still see it, like the aliens, everything. It's still like kind of a white universe that has a couple characters, and then on top of that, often these characters don't get much shading either. You know, they're kind of arbitrary. So Afrofuturism creates a narrative where black people are centered in the entire thing, right? And it doesn't again mean that there are no other races present. It's just that the universe that you're in, the imagination you're in, is undeniably a black universe, a black imagination. And the first time we've seen something done like that with an amazing scale is the Black Panther film. And I go on record saying it all the time. It's not actually my favorite film in the Marvel franchise. I can say that honestly. Some people might have some trepidation around saying that because it's like, I'm not trying to be racist, but I don't think Black Panther was that good. I understand that because as far as movies go, it wasn't, in my opinion, the best Marvel movie. But for us, it was definitely the most important movie.
And incredibly commercially successful, sort of
And exactly the results of which
disproving
were
the
there.
logic that, oh, it couldn't possibly be commercially successful. Nonsense. It was
Yeah,
huge.
it was huge, right? Because it's like we've been starving for stuff like that so long, and because despite me saying it's not the best one, because I think Infinity War is probably my best, my favorite. Despite that, it's still good. Like it wasn't like, oh, it's just Afrofuturism, but the movie's crap. No, it was actually really dope. But again, the fact that we're able to see it was more important than the movie's, you know, Rotten Tomatoes rating. It doesn't matter. It was just like they did it well enough that it looked beautiful, and we got to see what it looks like for like Afrofuturism and on top of that, I have to give Stan Lee credit because it's like they were like an uncolonized African nation with, as I've read, like if not the, but one of the most wealthy characters in the Marvel like universe, and it's just wow. Like I mean, I have to give it up to the creators, right? Because to even think of something like that in the 70s or 80s when it came about, and to give them that kind of a shine and not have it be fall into the usual tropes.
Yeah.
And I know again tangents, right? Because we're talking about my work, but I think that creating Kumbi Saleh 3020 CE and naming it after a Ghanaian kingdom from over 1,000 years ago, it transported the past to the future.
Mm-hmm.
But while I'm building that, I'm also thinking about the architecture I saw in Star Wars, the architecture I've seen in Wakanda, and images and concept drawings of Wakanda. All those things kind of filter in. So despite the lack of representation that I mentioned in Star Wars and all these things, there was still like a wealth of like futurism that was there that helped me to expand my imagination. It's just when I get that platform, for sure it's going to be black as possible because it's necessary. It's what I feel, it's what exists in my heart, but it's also extremely necessary. You know, so
I wanted to come back to something you mentioned early in this conversation about intersectionality,
yeah.
essentially, identity, when we were talking about the flower girl. Um, and of course, representation is can be a part of that. But
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about how uh, being a Lego artist and being a Black Canadian, a Ghanaian Canadian, how you talked about your relationships with queer Black women. How does intersectionality play into your artwork?
Well, um, I think intersectionality is it's new to a lot of people, to me included. Like I mean, what 2014 is when I first heard the phrase, developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, I believe her name is. She's an activist and attorney in the States, and she coined the phrase. And I'm saying this just, everybody, you can Google what intersectionality means, but just for the sake of this conversation, with the different intersections of one's identity. And I think when it comes to my work and like the conversations and experiences that I've had, Black women, and then on top of that is where the intersections come in, but Black queer women have a very unique perspective on the oppressive kind of systems that we all kind of try to navigate. And often, like in the media, even you hear, "Oh, a Black man was killed," like Black man, Black man, Black man, but no one, they don't, like Black trans women don't get the same kind of like media coverage or the same kind of like say her name. It doesn't happen in the same way because, well, because of like oppression, right? Like even within activist circles, right? Like we hear about it all the time. LGBTQ, amazing, but within the LGBTQ community, there's a shit ton of racism, right? Yeah. Like it doesn't. They don't always align. Like being a white gay man doesn't mean that you're completely aligned with a Black disabled gay like woman.
Yeah.
Just because you have that one thing in line. And this, in fact, points to the same thing as with like the Lego universe, right? Where we all love Lego. That's the one thing we all have in common. Aside from that, there are several other things that dictate our identities, and yeah, it's like I found that when that like a lot of my growth around identity politics came from Black queer women. So I always kind of tried like hail them up, and give them the respect and due that they deserve. And they're often the ones that are in the front lines of like protests and initiating like real significant change in the world due to their constant efforts to uplift their community and not fall victim to the one-dimensional Black man, targeted by police. Black man, it's not just Black men, it's Black children, it's Black queer women, it's Black, like, there's so many different intersections, and it's important to pay attention to those. And I think intersectionality, if I'm not mistaken, came about because of things like, there was some kind of discriminatory action or something towards a woman. But it was like, no, but it wasn't just that. It was racism and sexism. And that wasn't something that the courts were willing to. No, it's just one thing. It wasn't like they did this sexist thing. It's like it's different if they also throw in racial slurs and are sexist towards me. It lands very different than it would, let's say, on someone that was being sexualized against like their own consent, but not like racially sexualized as well, or gender identity racialized. So it's important that all aspects kind of are at least addressed, and if not just addressed, but actually uplifted and validated.
I want to talk for a couple minutes about what those of us who consider ourselves within the hobbyist community, the intention of the Brothers Brick is to highlight the great things that people do with Lego.
Right.
It's not focused on the hobbyist community. It's not focused on people outside the hobbyist community. And, the same thing with our audience. Our audience is considerably larger than the numbers that Lego talks about when they talk about the AFOL community, adult fans of Lego. And because of that, we've tried to be more representational of the population at large. Several of our current contributors and as well as our alumni have been or are members of the LGBTQI community. But at the same time, we can do more and we can do better in terms of representing people of color, certainly. What can sites like ours, media outlets like ours, do to help with the work, the cause, representation, and so on?
I think example, the one of the co-founders of Reddit recently I saw in a news broadcast stepped down from his position on the board and strongly suggested, as much as I guess within his power, to replace him with a black representative. And I mean, I understand like it's a weird kind of position. Of course, I agree, and I think that black people should be let into more positions of leadership in companies if that's what they really want. If inclusion is what is part of like the initiative of whichever company, then it's not like posting a black square isn't enough. Like I remember even having a conversation with my wife where I was like, it's a start, and I was kind of being like, yeah, I've seen people posting that don't normally post stuff, and it's awesome, and she was like, no. She was like, no, it's not enough. And it kind of ended there. But then after some thought, and I started thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, it's so easy to just say something and post something, and it's a lot harder to do the work. And I remember originally reading like this amazing quote about like institutional or systemic racism, um, and it's like it's an insidious system that was started by like years ago, okay, and it's made to benefit white people, usually at the top. Like you see what like the British like the British Empire has done, right? But in order to dismantle it, it's like being in a boat that is filling up with water, and you're constantly having to
Yeah.
flush out water with a bucket to stay afloat. It's constant work. And I do feel that a lot of people, a lot of companies are not ready to actually do the full work it takes to make effective systemic change. You know, intergenerational wealth has been established by so many sectors, right? Just even if it comes to like the redlining and not allowing black people to get mortgages on homes, how many people actually have like family wealth? And it may not be wealth, so to speak, like we're rich, but your parents can afford to like give you some money down to get your house or stuff like that. Like property ownership was denied us so long, right? And so now it's just like because you can go outside and see black people on posters, or you see some like South Asian people in positions that you didn't normally see them, and you're like, okay, things are better. And it's like notice that white people particularly are very good at patting themselves on the back. You're like, yeah, things are good, like everyone's doing well. But then when you think about it and you look at like the companies that you work in, or the websites that you have, and the teams that you have, and everything else, it's not as inclusive as you think. Like I remember applying for grants and not getting them from art councils in Toronto, and I took them to task. I came up with my own little statistical report because I went and looked at all the because they post who gets grants, and I went through every single one. I'm not a statistician, so it had some errors, but I did my best to actually Google them and find out their identity or how they identify. And it was like out of hundreds and hundreds of applicants, it was like sometimes not one black applicant got a grant. Sometimes it was just one. And then I also did my research into the jury selection, which they have a statement that specifically says we have diverse practices for, our jury selection, whatever. And when I look at it, there was usually always one East Asian. They got to have one East Asian on there, two white people, and then maybe one that was somewhere in ambiguity, like white, but French Canadian, and they live rural. So we have to look out for the francophones too. And then this person's 1% Métis over here. I'm like, great, because the definitely reparations for First Nations people needs to be there. But if you have the people judging who's going to get a grant and none of them are black, what are the chances that the black artist is going to get selected when there's missing cultural understandings around their work? Sometimes to look at their work, you can't really understand it. And I think that is a place to really start where if you're an organization or a company and you're like, okay, we want to do more. Well, look at your own team.
Yeah.
How many people of color, and if we're talking about specifically anti-black racism, how many black people are in positions of leadership. You know, I've worked with museums where, and it's always funny, they can be amazing people, super awesome, which often I've had the pleasure of working with great people in like the gallery kind of community. But when I do end up getting to talk to the one or two black people that work there, there's a kind of black conversation that happens where it's just like, mm-mm. And there's a lot of head shaking because that means that person is dealing with a lot of microaggressions, a lot of stagnation in terms of moving upward mobility, and just the fact that they're the only one, like, you know. And this often, I think, is the case where if you can look around and your spaces are mainly white, that's probably a good place to start and say there's a problem, right? I mean, it's great if it's mainly white, but also like like queer positive. But if there's no like black people being like represented in the actual space, then you're not going to get things changing from the inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it, like I mentioned that Ian Gray from Chicago had like his in the process of um, publishing his work and statistics around the Lego Group's products and the lack of diversity when it comes to the minifigs. But also, here's something: the sets from his report, the sets that have black minifigure characters and racialized characters cost more.
Hmm. Right. They're licensed. Exactly.
They cost more. So what, like, how is that? If you do like all the socioeconomic breakdowns, you have like so many black people across the continent, in South America, so many different places that, due to this systemic racism, are living in poverty. So they don't have the funds. They want to buy Lego sets for their kids, and on top of that, they want to buy Lego sets that have their kids doing something, and not just Black Panther, but the construction guy set, the kayaking family set, the city set, where you have black families just going camping. I've seen tons of those sets. But if I want to buy the one that is has a black family going camping, it costs more. You know, like that alone is an indicator that they probably don't have black people on the team that is creating sets somewhere. One person at least, like, hey, I've got a new set idea. Check this out. Like, not likely. So these are areas where things can, like, and should start to change, right? So that from the inside you have actual authentic change and not just like a surface kind of show of support. Because a show of support is great, but that goes away real quick.
Yeah.
You know, just like you have people damn near forgetting that we're in the middle of a pandemic. You know, we like to forget. It's like you do the thing and then you forget. It's like I bought the mask. Now I can like go and visit all my friends again. It's like it's not that simple.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's one thing, great, donate money to worthy causes. Awesome. But still, in terms of perpetuating like the silence of black voices and the representation of seeing people of all different ethnicities, there needs to be internal change, you know, and it needs to be uncomfortable, and that's the other side of it. I think that people, um, particularly white people, have a difficulty like really having those difficult conversations about race and understanding that there's going to be things that you have to give up. You know, it doesn't. There's it's that's just how it goes. It's like I know it. You know, you often hear the it's not. I didn't do anything. You know, it's like ancestors were doing shit, and I didn't do anything. I've been a good person. Like I donate here and I do this thing. I understand all of that, but
But
you
I
still,
benefit from that.
yeah, you still benefit. You benefit greatly from what they did,
Yeah.
and so there's a responsibility.
Yeah.
There is a responsibility. Just like when you know people criticize celebrities for not doing enough. I'm like, these people out here are the ones that made you rich, right? They support your art, whether it's movies or music or whatever you do. You have a platform to say something where people, and you're influential, where people will actually like listen to what you have to say, often more than like a politician or something. So there is a responsibility, I feel. If you don't want the responsibility of having to like address like injustice and the experiences of the people that support you, don't get into it. Don't strive to become, you know, number one or like have like a kind of national platform or whatever. There's a responsibility that goes with that, and I think that when like you exist in a system that supports you and is very evident that it supports you and it shows you and paints you and gives you like and those that look like you like almost unlimited access to all things, then there is definitely a responsibility there to, in many ways, even forfeit some of like those benefits in order to really make things equal, like and not even equal but equitable rather. That's the problem. I think there's this notion of equality that doesn't necessarily help because people don't need equality, they need equity, they need agency, right? If you're just thinking equal society, you give everybody the equal amount of things that exactly the same, but people need more, right?
Yeah.
Some need more than others, some need less than others. So it has to be giving people what they need, not what is deemed as equal for all.
Right. I think that's as we wrap up this portion of the conversation. One of the things I want to commit to as the founder and editor-in-chief of the Brothers Brick is to not just operate from the standpoint of choosing Lego creations to highlight that are representational and inclusive, but to your point, to operate more as a team inclusively. And that's something that a number of our commenters have rightly critiqued us for over the last couple of weeks as we came out in support of the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement. Um, well, what are you actually doing within your team to actually do the work over the longer term? And that's what I want to commit to. And you know, if you're watching this, um, you know, I'm as I address this to our readers rather than to you, Ekow. Uh, we want to hear from you. How can we do better? And if you want to get involved, let us know. So I'll let you have the last word, Ekow. But I really appreciate this conversation, and let's keep the conversation going. Any last words to share with us?
Well, I appreciate what you guys are doing. I appreciate the fact that you reached out and you want to have this like open conversation. Um, and to like the larger community out there, I would just suggest really thinking about how like insular a lot of these spaces are, like the Lego hobbyist spaces, um, and advocate for more inclusive like events and spaces, right? You create the space. You know, when I talked to another Black artist about the same grant thing I was mentioning, getting grants, um, some of them understood, and some were like, I don't even apply, right? Because you already feel that there is not like an atmosphere that is welcoming. So it's not just simply about, well, Black people don't show up here, so you know what are we supposed to do? No, it's about making it known that you are accepting of these, of like diversity and including people into these spaces. So that's what I challenge you to do, is to really think about that amongst, and it doesn't, and you know, making like a Black character in your like Lego display doesn't exactly like solve the problem. And that's maybe something for another conversation about like Black art and Black like lives and imagination that exists within like the white imagination. It's a very different kind of thing. So it doesn't necessarily mean start making more Black minifigures as part of your like Lego builds and sets, but maybe it's about like showing more work by like creators that are creating like diverse things, right? And honestly, this is what I often say, especially now since the climate has brought anti-Black racism to the front, and a lot of white people are like, "What should we do? Tell us." My response, in many ways, is Google is free.
Yeah.
You know, there
Figure.
is so much information and so much things out there. Take a look at Black Girl Dangerous, the website. You know, and there's just so many others, and I don't even have to list things. Just if that's what you really want to do, if you're really about trying to change something, then you can, you know, go online and just start looking up stuff and read stuff, and you'll start to see the light, and get the suggestions as to how you can help to make this world a lot more equitable and to remove injustice in all its forms from everywhere. And that does happen in the Lego sphere. We're not safe just because we play with Lego. It's everywhere. I'm telling you this. So something to just keep in mind. And to everyone that's been awesome, I really, really, really appreciate the support because it warms my heart and keeps me moving forward and wanting to build more. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. Let's keep up the conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.